I'm Cassie Schumacher, and I am real grateful to see you, Lee. It's
Good to see you, Cassie.
Welcome to the OhioRAAM show.
Thanks, Cassie. Well, thank you, Cassie Schumacher, for that introduction. We appreciate it a great deal. Cassie comes from the other corner of the state of Ohio, up there in the northeast by Cleveland. And Cassie is the only Ohioan to win a RAAM race across America race. I believe I'm right in that. I'm sure someone will straighten me out if I'm not. I appreciate it if you would, but we appreciate Cassie a lot, and we bump into her from time to time. When we bumped into her down in Portsmouth, Ohio, at the southern end of the tour of the Scioto River Valley. Cassie was riding with Danny Chu when he had his horrific accident that has left him paralyzed, and we're happy to report that Danny is working his way back, becoming a full-fledged cyclist on a hand cycle, and we certainly wish Danny well too. I chat with him every once in a while, and it's so good to hear him. And this is the OhioRAAM show, a show about cycling and ultracycling, and this is show number 166. And I'm the show host, Lee Kreider, and this show is a product of the Race Across America time stations in Ohio, time stations 41 in Oxford, Ohio, and time stations 42 in Blanchester, Ohio. On today's show, we're going to have Marshall Reeves, who is a 3-time RAAM racer and a 1-time finisher. It was quite a struggle for him to do it, and even his last race is very remarkable, and you can read all about it in his book, One Long Day. And that brings me to remind you that in the show notes at the bottom of this video, if you're watching the show on OhioRAAMshow.com, you'll see links to the book. You'll always see links there to our guests and some other information there about Marshall, so be sure to check it out. This book is available on Amazon. Well, Marshall has been kind of hard to peg down because he's a international pilot for Delta Airlines, but we finally got a schedule set out and then realized it was about the time that Hurricane Irma was about to hit his house in Melbourne Beach, Florida. But not to be put aside, Marshall, from his retreat in the mountains of North Carolina, joined us on the show. He is one cool guy to sit there and talk to us while who knows what was happening back at his house. So with that, we're going to go on down to North Carolina and talk to Marshall. Well, hello, Marshall. How are you down there? I guess you're in North Carolina, aren't you?
I am, Lee. We escaped Irma yesterday, and we're coincidentally up where I did a lot of my training for RAAM in the foothills of the Appalachians here in North Carolina.
Well, I should say that even as we speak, I think, Marshall, your house in, where is it, Melbourne, Florida?
Melbourne Beach, actually. Across
Melbourne
the street
Beach.
from the ocean.
How many feet from the ocean?
Probably 200 feet from the ocean and about 700 feet from the river. It's on the barrier island, right where it doesn't need to be. You're
sitting up there in the mountains of North Carolina, and
right.
Here you are taking time out of where I'd be pacing up and down the floor, I think, to chat with me here on the OhioRAAM show. So we appreciate that a lot.
I'm happy to be here.
Tell me a little about yourself, your background, thing about your personal history outside of the world of cycling, because I know you do have a world outside of it.
Born in Rhode Island, grew up in South Carolina, went to school at the University of South Carolina, played sports all my life, always liked the challenge, so I majored in physics at the University of South Carolina for some unknown reason. And then once I graduated, I went into the Navy because I was there on an ROTC scholarship. That led to my going to flight training for the Navy, and after that I got out and got a job with Delta Airlines, and I'm doing that to this day for another 3.5 years.
And I believe you do fly international routes, is that right?
For the last 10, Delta is a little bit different from other airlines in that there's certain airplanes that only fly international and some that only fly domestic. And the airplane I'm on flies 99% international. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I was actually, in the book I mentioned, I was in Frankfurt when some of the RAAM news came down right before the race in 2016.
Yeah, well, we'll get into your book after a while. I just wonder if you ever took me to Europe.
May have. If you've been, you never know. And it never hurts to look up into the cockpit just to see who's up there. I have run into people that I've known. The odds are infinitesimally small, but it has happened.
So you've had quite a career in cycling. So we'll sketch out what you've done in the past, and we'll get into your RAAM career then.
Sure. Played, like I said, I played sports in high school and college. And then I had a friend in college who was a marathon runner. So I got started running marathons and was really late getting to the bike. I started riding the bike because a friend of mine was going to do a triathlon. Since I already ran and swam, I started riding. That became my favorite thing to do. So I obviously trained more on that and less on what I needed to. So I started doing longer rides and still didn't know that I was cut out for endurance until I started riding mountain bikes. And they had an event in Central Florida. It was a 12-hour mountain bike race. So I went up for the mountain bike race, finished the race in 12 hours, and then didn't think anything more of it and went home. And the next morning I got a call from a friend asking me why I didn't stick around to get my podium awards. And I didn't even know I had won. So, and that actually qualified me for a World 24-Hour Mountain Bike race in Whistler. So I went up and did that, and didn't do that well or as well as I expected. So I decided I would do it again. So I wound up doing the World Championship mountain bike race another 3 times, and won the age group the last 2 times. So that kind of launched my career. And then I found out about some long distance rides across Florida, which is where I met Rob Kish, and we got to talking about RAAM. And so it was, that part of my life was over at that point. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about that. So I was doing Sebring 24-hour races, more 12-hour races. That got me going on that, but the biking was my real passion, and my knees and ankles kind of steered me more in that direction because it hurt to run but not to ride. So kept riding, and the longer the better. And it turns out that, it's like a lot of things, you don't know you have a propensity for it until you do it.
Tell me about your RAAM experience. How many times have you been in RAAM, and what were your outcomes?
My first long distance endurance was actually Littoral Team. It was a short-lived ride in Europe, and I did that on a 2-man team with Rob. And I had already decided by that time that I wanted to do RAAM. And so the next year I applied to RAAM officials to get an entry, although that wasn't an official qualifying event. And they said I needed to do the qualifying event, so I had to put it on hold. Went down in 2009, I believe, to Sebring, the qualifier, and qualified for RAAM there. And then that's a 3-year qualification. So 2011 was my first naive attempt at RAAM. We went with minimum crew, no RV, and me with way too much overconfidence. And I strained a muscle pretty badly early on in that race and just barely hobbled through Kansas, barely made the cutoff at the Mississippi River, and then was pretty much done once we got to Ohio. Lessons learned, I went back in 2014, qualifying again in Sebring. And in 2014, pretty much the same thing happened. A series of events kind of led to the total depletion of crew and myself, and that just emphasizes the importance of crew and how important and how significant sleep deprivation is for everybody. And that kind of got us again. And unfortunately, then we were only 250 miles. We were in Grafton, West Virginia, so we were pretty close. And it just, the handwriting was on the wall. With less than 24 hours, we knew we weren't going to make it. So we licked our wounds, went back, and then I got a call after that from some buddies who were following it, and they wanted to see me succeed. So they said, if you ever do it again, we'd like to crew for you. So I said, all right, well, I guess we'll go again in 2016. So 2016, Pretty much nearly ended the same way as 2014, but we took a wild chance on a plan and it worked, and I barely hobbled in with 3 or 4 hours to spare, but we did cross the finish line. So 3 attempts, 1 completion.
Well, I don't want to spoil the book, One Long Day, by having you tell all the events that led up to that 2016. It's quite a story to tell, Marshall. Maybe you could just share one of the things that challenged you during that time.
Well, like I said, the reason I wrote the book, and I think everyone that has raced RAAM, whether it's solo or team or even the crew, I think one of the takeaways is that it's almost an out-of-body experience. You're almost on the outside looking in, and it's like a story unfolding in front of you. And in this instance, it was just a really bizarre story. We had everything on paper that said this should be pretty much a cakewalk. And then, as I alluded to, we had an incident, pretty major, nearly catastrophic, nearly cost one of my crew members his life before the race started. I was scrambling to get crew, and that's where you came in. You posted on your forum one day that there was a mechanic available, Adam Darby. And I contacted him because up until a month before the race, I didn't even have a mechanic. I was just going to bring enough spare bikes to hopefully preclude the need for him. But he agreed to go, so he was on at the last minute, and he helped me drive the RV to the West Coast. But we didn't get our final crew member until the morning of registration and sign-in and inspection. So everything just kind of led up to that point. And then from then on, the race is pretty much like a lot of people's experiences with the ups and the downs and the things you do to keep going. Things that happened along the way, and then the end was equally as dramatic. But I just finished the race, and it seemed like a story to me, and I had nothing really to do with it. I was just one cog in the wheel. So I started putting it down on paper, and it really didn't take long for it to unfold. And it seemed like a good enough story to go ahead and get it published. Not as a look at me thing, but as here's a bunch of guys that got together and made something happen that shouldn't have happened despite all the odds. So that was the evolution of the book.
Well, it's a good book. And listen, Marshall, I'm going to play Mr. Amazon today. If you read Dex Took's unfinished journal, then you're sure to like One Long Day, because it's every bit as exciting as Dex's book was. Unfinished Business, that's right. It's every bit as exciting as Dex and Joni's book. The way Marshall got me to read it was he said my name was in. What are you looking at in the future with your cycling?
2017, I'm involved with 3,000 Miles to the Cure. So 2017, there were 2 crews from that charity in there, and I was the crew chief on one of them. And I can see that in my future. And like everyone else, once you finish the race, you say never again. But you can't help but think about it, and you can't help but wonder what's going to happen years down the road. And I know that I think only 10 people over the age of 60 have finished it, so I'm in that group. I don't think anyone has had a successful finish, although I got a feeling Dex Took, speaking of him, I got a feeling he may try it in a few years. But I look ahead and wonder if I'm 70 and feel like maybe I have a chance, that could be something in the works. But in the meantime, I'll do things a little less severe, just because cycling gets in your blood and you can't get rid of it. The other thing about the race, of course, is the crew, the people you meet along the way, the time stations. I mean, it's all part of, it's an adventure. It's not just a race. So that's why it gets in your blood like it has yours, and you just can't get rid of it.
You mentioned 3,000 Miles to a Cure. We've been a great supporter of that charity. It does wonderful work, and we always have a chance to talk to Maria and any of her crowd anytime we can, and we appreciate what all of you do for that. You're wondering now whether your house is still there?
Well, the house will be there. What kind of shape it's going to be in, I don't know. But even if it survived, the chances of it having power for the next 10 days is probably slim. So we're fortunate enough to have this option up here in North Carolina. My base as a pilot is Atlanta, so I can drive to Atlanta for that. And had I stayed, I probably wouldn't be able to get to work. So it was just a win-win for us to come up to here. And you can't really, other than taking precautions at home, there's not much else you can do. Mother Nature's going to have her way, and you're just going to have to live with it. So that's my attitude, and whatever cards it deals me, I'll play that hand.
I've always heard that pilots have to keep a cool head in a crisis, and you sure seem to be doing that. Stay in touch, will you, Marshall?
I will do, and thanks for this invitation today. I really enjoyed it. Talk to you soon, Lee. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Marshall, for guesting with us, even as the storm was wrapping itself around your home there in Florida. And we certainly hope that when you get back there, you'll find things in good condition, minimal damage. And always, we want to thank those of you who view the show, who watch it regularly. We appreciate you a great deal. And we particularly appreciate those of you who take just a moment to flick that little key and say you like the show. We appreciate those of you much who make a comment about the show or even share the show on your own social media sites. That means a lot to us, helps the show grow, but more than that, it helps people find out about the sport of ultracycling, and we appreciate that a great deal. As I've said before, always check the show notes at the bottom of each show at the website, OhioRAAMshow.com. Now, we made a little bit of adjustment in schedule to squeeze Marshall in here because of the hurricane. We thought it was timely to get him on. We've changed our schedule just a bit, shoved the show we had planned with Dusty Dustin back a few days, so we will have her on the 27th of September. That said, let's say goodbye.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.